Here I am with Vint Cerf, the father of the internet, and we are very excited to have you here today, Vint. Thank you so much. This interview is brought to you by Broadband and by Vint's invention of the internet. Vint, a couple questions. Was there a specific moment when you realized just how significant your invention was? I know you invented TCP/IP protocols, which is essentially the infrastructure of the internet. It dictates how the internet works and talks to each other. Can you tell me when there was your aha moment of, wow, this is something big?
Well, first of all, let's set the record straight. Bob Kahn and I did this work together, and he started it. And so we should be careful not to label me as the father of the internet. Bob and
A
I
co-father of the internet. Yeah.
some equal billing here, and he's the one that came up with the question: how do we interconnect packet switch nets together that are not identical? And in fact, the ones that he confronted me with when I was at Stanford in 1973 was three different networks: the ARPANET that we also had worked on, and then a packet radio network for mobile operation, and a packet satellite network for long distance communication. And they were all different. And so the problem was, how do you hook them together and make it look the same to all the computers that are on any of the networks that are incorporated into the system? And just to add a little extra pinch to this, down the street from my lab at Stanford University was Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, where Bob Metcalf and David Boggs were inventing Ethernet, which was a fourth packet switching technology that ran at 3 megabits a second on a coaxial cable. So there were these multiple packet switching technologies that were evolving and emerging in the early 1970s. So your question, of course, was, when did I realize that this experiment was going to be a big deal? I think the best date that I can offer, or rough date, is in 1988. Now, by this time, multiple networks had been built and interconnected into this internet. The ARPANET and the packet radio net, packet satellite net were DARPA developments. But in the interim mid-1980s period, the Department of Energy built the Energy Sciences Network, NASA built the NASA Science Internet, and NSF built the NSFnet backbone, plus about a dozen intermediate level networks to connect universities to the NSFnet backbone. So by 1988, this thing is becoming significant, at least in the US academic and research community. But on the commercial side, it was also becoming very visible. In 1984, which is a year after we officially turned the internet on operationally, a company called Cisco Systems was founded to build routers that they could sell to people who wanted to be part of the internet. And of course, Metcalf had started 3Com in 1982 or so, and was selling Ethernet connections and also was offering TCP/IP. The Unix operating system was or a version of it was being managed at Berkeley, and their 4.2 release of Unix BSD incorporated TCP/IP, and Unix became an extremely popular operating system that's scattered throughout the academic and research communities. In addition to that, in 1986, a guy named Dan Lynch started an organization he called Interop, which stood for interoperability. And it became not just a training and educational thing, but it became a showcase for exhibiting equipment and software that animated the internet. So at the Interop show in 1988, 50,000 people showed up at the Moscone Center to see internet in action, to see equipment and software and all kinds of applications running. And of course, the rule was that you couldn't be on the show unless you demonstrated you could interwork with everybody else. And so everybody connected to this Ethernet, bright yellow, banana yellow cable that stretched throughout the exhibit hall. You plugged into that and demonstrated to potential customers that you were interoperable with everybody else. I walked into the show in 1988, and with me was a guy named Eric Benamou, who became the CEO of 3Com after Metcalf departed. And I turned to Eric and I said, we're looking at a big Cisco three-level display. It's so big that you could walk into it and go up the stairs and talk to various engineers. And I turned to Eric and I said, how much do these cost? And he said in 1988, $250,000. And he said that doesn't count the cost of manning the booth for a week. So I just sat there with my jaw on the floor thinking, holy crap, somebody thinks that the internet's going to make money. And then I thought, how are we going to get the general public and the commercial sector up, private sector up on this thing? Because at that point in 1988, the only parties who were allowed on the internet were people who were in the academic community supported by DARPA or NSF or DOE or NASA. And it wasn't available to the private sector, although the private sector was offering the picks and shovels, so to speak, to let you build pieces of internet and hook things together. So I would argue that that's when I realized that this was going to be a big deal. And not very long thereafter, the following year, 3 commercial internet services popped up in the United States. One was called UUNet, which was the first of the commercial internet services. Another was called PSINet for Performance Systems International. And the third one was called CERFnet, which was originally supposed to be SURFnet, but it changed its name to CERFnet because somebody else had taken SURFnet in the Netherlands. It was a network that was built to connect academic communities. General Atomics had built this CERFnet, which they had an advertising campaign for, T-shirts showing people surfing the internet. That's what you do in San Diego. So they had to rename it, and they decided to name it the California Educational Research Foundation Network, or CERFnet. Then they called me up and they said, is it okay if we call it CERFnet? My first reaction was, what if they screw it up? Am I going to be embarrassed? And I thought, well, wait a minute. People name their kids after other people, and if the kids don't come out right, they usually don't blame the people they named them after. So I said, sure, go ahead. So in July of 1989, I flew out to San Diego, and Susan Estrada, who is the executive director of CERFnet, and I took this plastic bottle full of glitter and we smashed it over a Cisco router and we launched CERFnet. So 88 and 89 were the years when I realized could be a really big deal. And it didn't take long after that, in 1991, in December or thereabouts, when Tim Berners-Lee announced the World Wide Web, which was not broadly noticed, but a couple of guys at the National Center for Supercomputer Applications in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, saw the text-based browser that Tim had released and said, what if we had a graphical user interface? So they developed something they called Mosaic. It was a free open source piece of software, and it was downloaded bazillions of times. Eric Bina and Mark Andreessen were noticed by the founder of Silicon Graphics, who went to Champaign-Urbana and took them back to the West Coast to start Netscape Communications. And it went public in 1995, and the stock went through the roof. And the Bay Area investment community went crazy and was throwing money at anything that looked like it might have something to do with the internet. So by 1995, it's clear the boom is on. The dot boom happens. It goes on for about 5 years, and then a whole lot of companies that thought they were going to make money died because they didn't have any revenue. They just had a lot of capital that they spent. So there were the bodies of various startups were scattered around in the Bay Area and elsewhere, but several survived. Now, an example, in 1994, Amazon got started, and they did pretty well. And in 1998, Google got started, and it did okay too. So here we are today. There were a small but very significant number of companies started during that dot boom period that survived and thrived. So certainly, I would say during the period from 1988 to, let's say, 1993 or so, it became very clear that this was a non-stoppable phenomenon.
Wow, that's amazing. I should mention, I think it was 95, you got the National Medal of Technology from President Bill Clinton, right?
Actually, 97. It was
97. Okay.
Yeah, and that behind me is the plaque. There we go.
Yeah,
That's the ego wall back there. That
the ego wall.
yeah,
I
for me, the rest of my office is a mess, but the camera is definitely is focused this way so that it doesn't look too messy.
It's not that big, man. I feel like you could have a much bigger ego wall if you wanted to, but
I ran out of room. I have map filing cabinets filled with stuff like this that I don't have any room to display, so I don't.
well, you have plenty of accolades. My next question for you, Van, is when you helped invent the internet with Bob Kahn, how did you envision people would use it?
Well, we actually had some good experience that meant this was not entirely a blind alley or a dark room. By 1973, the ARPANET had been in functioning since 1969, so for about 4 years.
Yeah.
In 1971, mid-year or thereabouts, a guy named Ray Tomlinson invented electronic mail, networked electronic mail. Before that, we had file transfers and we had remote access to time-sharing machines as the fundamental service that the ARPANET provided, and it served our primary purpose, which was to share computing resources among the universities and research institutions that ARPA was funding to do AI research and general computer science research. They basically wanted everybody to share their capabilities, their computational abilities, their software, in order to advance the state of the art more quickly. And they said, we're funding everybody, so don't hide everything, share as much as you can. So when Tomlinson comes up with this idea for networked email, it takes the community by storm, and it becomes the most popular application on the net. And very quickly after this email evolved, the notion of distribution lists came along. So the first distribution list that I joined was called Sci-Fi Lovers, which is, arguing over who are the best science fiction authors and which novels are the best ones. And then the second one I joined was called Yum Yum, and it was a restaurant review thing that Stanford did for the Palo Alto area. So it's very evident looking back that those were examples of social media kinds of
Mhm.
interaction. So we had a fair sense of the kinds of things that were possible in a networked environment when Bob and I were doing the work. We were also motivated by the fact that this was intended to, our internet research was intended to support military command and control. And that was a very important consideration because we knew that we needed to support voice, video, and data in this system in order to facilitate the command and control functionality of the network. And we also knew that our allies would have to have access to the technology so that their command and control systems could interwork. That led to our decision not to constrain the information about the design of the internet. So we published our first paper in 1974 in IEEE Transactions on Communications in May of that year. But we also decided not to apply for patents or to put any intellectual property constraints on access or licensing fees or anything else. We published the results openly. We had distribution lists within the community with all the documentation. My best friend, Steve Crocker, who I worked with on the ARPANET at UCLA, started what was called the Request for Comment series, which is the documentation series for the ARPANET and subsequently the internet, which goes on today. I mean, there are something like 9 or 10,000 documents that have come out of that effort over time. So we made the decision to release this openly. And part of our decision thinking was something like this: who are our allies today? That is to say, 1973. And there was this list. And we said, who were our allies 25 years before that in World War II? And it was a different list. And then we said, who will our allies be 25 years from now? And we didn't know. So we said, well, the only way to be sure that whoever the allies are have access to the technology is simply open it up. So that's what we did. And of course, that accelerated the ability to take up the technology and use it and to further develop it.
I'm fascinated by the military aspect, but also what I heard from you was that your first inclination of how the internet was going to work was because of a kind of a tribalism of folks who loved sci-fi books. Is that?
Well, we should be careful. That there were other distribution lists
Yeah,
on other
yes.
topics. So it wasn't the only one. It just happened to be that was the one that I
Yeah.
found first because I was interested then. I'm still a happy
Sci-fi.
fiction reader. But the point to be made there is not the specific subject matter as much as it is the use in a social context of this kind of computer technology. And the fact that it was so rapidly adopted, there's another angle that's kind of interesting. Uh, Once you have this network email, you now can have interactions with someone that are not in real time. Instead of doing what we're doing right now, where we both have to be awake, you can send a message and the other person can respond to it and when they're awake. So that means you can operate over a more broad number of time zones. And so I thought that that would, in fact, reduce the requirement for travel because we could just talk to each other by email. Well, after I became a program manager in the Information Processing Techniques Office, I looked at the travel budget. It had gone up by a factor of 4. So I remember thinking, what the hell? So then I looked carefully at what was going on, and what had happened is exactly right, that we had a larger number of people operating over a broader number of time zones interacting. When they did have to get together, they traveled for longer distances, so the travel budget went up instead of
Uh,
down.
had to do with how far. Yeah. It's crazy.
But sometimes it's important to be in the same time zone when you can both be
Yeah.
awake at the same time and interact with each other.
Vint, what's a decision you made in the early stages that has shaped what we have today?
Well, the primary focus of attention was connectivity. Anything on the net should be able to talk to anything else on the net. And the reason that we adopted that position is we didn't know what would need to talk to what. And so we didn't have any reason to put any constraints into who could talk to whom. And of course, we assumed that if somebody called, so to speak, you could hang up or not answer the phone if you didn't want to. And so we didn't see that as hazardous. Looking back on that, that was a little naive because denial of service attacks exploit the fact that theoretically you can go from anywhere on the internet to anywhere else.
Yeah.
And so we've had to evolve tactics for dealing with DDoS, distributed denial of service attacks, among other things. And then there's malware attacks and all these other things. On the other hand, I don't think at the time we were doing this that we necessarily knew what the constraints should be on who could talk to whom. Mechanisms involving crypto help considerably because if you can't authenticate, then the crypto stream will be undecryptable, and therefore the other party can't attack, except for blunt brute force kinds of attack where just packets are raining at you from all directions. So connectivity was very, very critical decision. And it remains still very important today for international commerce and all kinds of other economic and social reasons. There was another decision that we made, which people laugh at us for, but it wasn't funny at the time. We were trying to figure out how much address space we should have for the number of machines that would be on this collection of networks. And also we didn't know how many networks there were going to be. But remember, this is an experiment. We haven't built it yet. So we're just trying to do the design. We said, okay, so how many networks should we accommodate for this experiment? And we said, well, how many countries are there? And we guessed at 128, which was wrong, but it's a power of 2, and that's how engineers think. So we said, okay, maybe there'll be 2, national scale networks per country. So 2 times 128 is 256. That's 8 bits. And so we'll allocate 8 bits for a network number. And then how many computers per network? And we said, well, go for broke. How about 16 million? That's another 24 bits. So the 32-bit address space, if it were densely used, would accommodate something like 4.3 billion terminations. This is in 1974, when there's nobody on any of them. So that's the network IP address size that we chose, thinking it was an experiment. And in the back of my mind, I thought, well, listen, if this thing works, we'll then have a production version of it. Well, around 92, it was apparent that we were going to run out of IPv4, version 4 address space. Not because it was being used densely, but it was being consumed not very densely. So at that point, the Internet Engineering Task Force started to work on a new version of the Internet Protocol format, which they called IP version 6, IP version 5 was an experiment that didn't work, so we threw that away and went on to the next number. IP version 6 allowed for 128 bits of address space. 2 to the 128 is approximately 3.4 times 10 to the 38th addresses, which is the number only the Congress would appreciate. And so that's the currently available address space is really quite enormous. However, it hasn't been broadly adopted. Only about maybe 30 or 40% of the net is running on V6, and everything else is still running on V4. And a lot of them are dual stack, where they run V4 and V6 concurrently. And you might say, well, why is that? And the answer is, first of all, that at the time that we made the decision, 1996, to introduce IP version 6, we're in the middle of the dot boom. Nobody has run out of IPv4 address space, and nobody's paying any attention to adopting IPv6. They're too busy trying to figure out how to make money in the middle of the dot boom. Then after the dot boom dies, people find another way of doing addressing. It's called network address translation, and I won't bother trying to go into detail there. But that particular hack has allowed us to reuse and repurpose IPv4 addresses. So in 2026, there hasn't been nearly as much uptake of V6 addresses as one would have hoped. However, there aren't any more V4 addresses left. And so there's increasing pressure to adopt the larger format. Now, somebody would say, well, why don't you go back in your time machine and whisper in your 30-year-old ear that you need 128 bits of address space? And I'm sure that my 28-year-old or 30-year-old self would probably say something like, who are you? Some old fart, showing up. What do you know? And besides, I couldn't possibly explain to anybody why I need 2 to the 38th or 10 to the 38th addresses for an experiment that I don't even know is going to work. So I think even if I were to whisper in my earlier self's ear, it wouldn't have gone anywhere.
You'd be like, why would I need that many? This is an experiment. This is
Exactly.
crazy.
And the crypto turns out to be another place where there's a lot of flap. People say, why didn't you secure the network more, you idiot? And the answer is, well, actually, we were working as early as 1975 with NSA on a design of a secured version of the internet. The trouble is that key distribution turns out to be a big challenge. And before we had public key crypto. Public key crypto allows for and facilitates key distribution in a way that key distribution centers never would. So it didn't exist at the time that we were doing the original internet work. The work I did with NSA started out with more conventional kinds of crypto technology, and we built packet encryption systems. We built a secured version of a network using the key distribution of the day. And after I learned about public key crypto in 1976, it was instantly apparent that we could apply that and retrofit it into the internet. So I didn't force it to go in those early days because I wanted to get it up and running to demonstrate that the basic technology would work. Besides, most of the users were graduate students. They're the last group in the world you would rely on to do good key management. So I was happy to put off the introduction of end-to-end crypto and other uses of public key crypto, digital signatures and the like. And of course, we have retrofitted that into the network, and now it's an essential part of the way it operates.
Describe today's internet in one word.
Connectivity.
Can you give me another line about how important connectivity is?
It's the only way that this technology will serve any use. It's if more than one thing can communicate, whether it's two things or 2,000 things. The fact that they have the ability to move information back and forth is the fundamental element that makes the internet useful.
What do you think is the most misunderstood thing about the internet?
For those of us who grew up with it and experienced it spoonful by spoonful over decades, there is confusion about the World Wide Web and the internet. The generic term internet incorporates all of it because that's what everybody hears and sees. But there is a distinction. Tim Berners-Lee delivered the Hypertext Transport Protocol in 1991 as a layer of protocol above TCP/IP. So when I think internet, I think of the TCP/IP structure and the ability of computers to communicate with each other, to move data packets back and forth. The World Wide Web, of course, is a gigantic and amazing application sitting on top of that connectivity. So often I will hear people say the internet stinks or it's got, bad things going on in it, and why didn't you do something about that? And of course, it wrinkles my brow a little because I'm still thinking, well, the internet is this basic connectivity engine, and the World Wide Web is where all the applications are, and that's where all the problems are. That's not entirely fair. There are infrastructure issues that need to be addressed at the TCP/IP layer as well. But most of the things that people are disturbed by are socially and economically are up there in the application space, which is supported so well by the World Wide Web. I think people need to understand also that a lot of the things that they don't like about the internet are the consequences of bad behavior by people who choose to behave that way. It's not like the network is making them do something bad. They choose to take advantage of it to harm others or to, gain, for some gain that they foresee as useful or attractive. And so people need to understand that this is as much a social problem as it is a technological one, and that we can't prevent some harmful things from happening using technology alone. So I have a sort of a syllogism to deal with this. The first thing you could say is that if you can stop someone from doing something harmful using technology, that's a great solution. You incorporate that into the architecture and you spread that through the internet and you inhibit some of the bad behaviors. But that's not going to stop everything. So the next thing you talk about is post hoc enforcement, where you tell everybody, if we catch you doing these things, there will be consequences. You tell people don't speed on the road because if we catch you, there'll be consequences. Of course, we don't catch everybody, but at least you're on notice that if you do that, there's a potential hazard. So that's the next thing you do is post hoc enforcement. The third thing you do is say, don't do that, it's wrong. And some people will say, well, moral suasion is weak. And my reaction to this is, well, okay, let's talk physics. The weakest force in the universe is gravity. I mean, you can literally, the fact that I can pick up my mobile, I'm against the force of gravity of the entire Earth, tells you how weak gravity is. On the other hand, when you have enough mass, it keeps the planets in orbit around the sun, and it keeps us from flying off of planet Earth, even though we're rotating at 1,000 miles an hour at the equator. So I tell people, if you have enough social mass, then norms can become very, very powerful forces to discipline behavior. And so those are my three elements: technical prevention, post hoc enforcement, and moral suasion.
Which leads me to my next question, I think is a good segue. Give me your hot take, Vint. The internet has made humanity more what?
Certainly more connected. And I think that has been an important benefit. People have discovered each other who would not otherwise would not know anything about their common interests. Of course, one problem we have is that some common interests are inimical to society and they're facilitated by this powerful technology. So we have to understand that and we have to be prepared to deal with it. On the other hand, think of all the advances that have occurred in the last 25 years or so, or even 50 if you like. It's been pretty amazing, and a lot of it has been facilitated by the fact that people get access to either other people or information that they might not otherwise have, and they can find it thanks to companies like Google and others that are indexing the World Wide Web's content. And now, of course, we got artificial intelligence and large language models, which have ingested a huge amount of content and made it more readily accessible to people.
If your legacy wasn't the internet, what would you want it to be?
Well, I have to say that my wife and I are both proud and relieved that we have two sons that came out okay, more than okay. We think they're really good people, and that's not an inconsequential accomplishment, especially in this day and age.
Mhm.
I am working on something though that several things that I'm quite excited about beyond the internet. One of them is an interplanetary extension of the internet, and that's been going on since 1998. We're on the cusp of being able to deploy that capability as we return to the moon and go on to Mars and of course, explore the rest of the solar system. So that's an exciting potential legacy with a team of people that started out of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory way back in 1998. Then there's the interspecies internet work that's been going on since 2013. And that's looking at how we can understand and possibly explore how non-human species interact with each other, either intraspecies or interspecies, including with us. And so that project is beginning to pick up steam. Then there's another one called Digital Vellum, which is about the problem of preserving digital information over hundreds or thousands of years. Because I'm very worried, as many others are, that digital information is fragile. Just because it's bits doesn't mean it'll last forever. Bits are often encoded in optical form or in magnetic form, and that can deteriorate. So we're looking for technologies that can save bits for 1,000 years, but then we have to figure out what the bits mean, which means we have to preserve their meaning for 1,000 years. Do you think 1,000 years from now somebody's going to be able to read an 8-inch floppy disk, even if the bits were still there? So there are questions like that that the Digital Vellum project is undertaking to answer. Did I leave anything out? Yes. Then there's another big problem called global warming. And I don't sit here to tell you I'm trying to solve global warming, but the team that I'm working with is concerned that even if we stop producing greenhouse gases tomorrow morning, that there will be an overhang of their effect for a period of time that could last 100 years or more. And the overhang means that there will be continued melting of ice in the polar regions. The more the ice melts, the greater the sea rise, and the worse impact there is on the coastal regions of the world. Huge hundreds of millions of people will have to move away from the coast because they won't be habitable anymore, to say nothing of places that are too hot to live. So we're looking at how to preserve the ice in the glaciers, especially in Antarctica, but elsewhere as well. They are fundamental to fresh water. And if they melt, not only do we lose the fresh water into the oceans, which are salty, but we also see ocean rise that has really severe side effects. So we're working on the problem of preserving glaciers by essentially slowing them down from sliding off into the ocean. And it's at the moment it's a research project to gather the right engineering data to figure out what tactics might actually work to slow down glacier movement. That won't stop global warming, but it will slow down some of its impact while we're trying to get rid of the greenhouse gases.
So what I heard was you're working on climate change initiatives, slowing down glacier movement and melt. You're working on how planets will talk to each other and the standardization of a framework of how planets are going to talk to each other. And did I hear you're working on, will we eventually be able to talk to our pets, Vint?
That,
Because I
yes,
really would love to know what my dog Winnie is thinking right now. But is this a thing?
yes. Go to interspecies.io and you'll find out all kinds of stuff going on, especially for dogs. There are these hexagonal buttons that the dogs can push to communicate with their owners. And it's turning into a really interesting research project. The IPNSIG.org, Interplanetary Network Special Interest Group.org, is where you'll find out about the interplanetary internet. Icepreservation.org is where you'll find out about our efforts to save the glaciers, basically. So those are, a few of the things that I'm currently engaged in, which I hope are successful, and somebody will remember I had a small role to play.
Please don't ever retire, Vint. Don't- I mean, I'm sure your wife wants you to, but that's incredible work, and those are quite amazing legacies. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to share?
Yeah, a couple of things. Some life lessons that come out of this 50-year odyssey. The first one is if you want to do anything big, get help, preferably from people that know more than you do. And I've been very lucky to find lots of people who are smarter than I am and have been very, very instrumental in making these various projects successful. The second thing is that you need to learn how to sell your ideas. A lot of engineers don't have much respect for salespeople. And I have to remind them, if the salespeople are not successful, the engineers don't get paid. And that puts a slightly different slant on the importance of sales. But if you can't sell your ideas, you'll never do anything big, because you have to get other people to want to do what you want to do, and that's a sales job. So that's another important life lesson. And I guess the third one is what I'll call patience and persistence. Most of the projects that I work on are decades long kinds of projects. They don't happen tomorrow morning. You don't get instant gratification. It's sometimes 3 steps up and 2 steps back. And so patience and persistence really count when you're trying to do very big and very long-term projects.
I remember the Deuce, is it Josh Letterbug? Well, an important lesson that he gave you was,
Oh, yes, Josh. Yes, dear Josh. He's the Nobel Prize winner for work on recombinant DNA at Stanford. He was on the board of the Corporation for National Research Initiatives that Bob Kahn started in 1986, and I joined him in that year as his first employee. Bob and I were working on digital libraries. And I was trying to explain to Josh, what is a digital library and how would it work? And I cover this big whiteboard with all these ideas and architecture and everything else. And after I get done, he looks at me and he says, "Vint, do something." And his point was, don't just talk about it, get something done. And I thought that was the best advice I'd ever gotten.
do something. Vint, who's your favorite science fiction author? I do have to know that.
Uh, I have several, actually. Asimov is at the top of the list for the Foundation series. I love early Heinlein. Uh, Orson Scott Card is amazing. And so there are 3 examples of science fiction writers that I really enjoy. And I've reread a number of their books more, that some people say, why would you do that? And it's no different than listening to music over and over again. It's anticipation of a part that is coming and you're going to look forward to reading it. If you extend your question to fantasy or something, then J.R.R. Tolkien would have to be on the list. I don't know how many times I've read The Lord of the Rings, the triple series, plus the original Hobbit. But he is magic. His command of language is so complete that when you read the poems that he has in the books, you can hear the music that goes with it. It's just quite astonishing.
I love how you said something like something about computer engineering. It's not science fiction anymore, it's reality. That's kind of what computer engineers do. They make sci-fi into reality. So
Engineering is turning science fiction into reality, and that's what we're seeing in front of our eyes today, especially with some of the AI work that's going on.
last question I have for you, Vint. The AI boom, obviously, we're a lot of frontier technologies. Where do you see it going? Do you see it being a fad? I mean, it's fascinating to hear that ARPA was funding AI back in the 70s, 80s, and we're all the way now in 2026. Where do you see AI going?
Well, first of all, we're in a different era from the earlier phases. There have been 3 phases altogether. The first was heuristic programming, then it was expert systems, and now it's large language models. I think that we are astonished at what we can make these systems do. And of course, they still do things that we can't anticipate or don't anticipate, and which are not helpful. Sometimes goes by the name of hallucination. We're getting better at detecting that that's happening, but we haven't necessarily got to the point where we can assure that it doesn't, which means that some of the applications that AI is used for need to be executed with some great care and a great deal of attention to avoiding harm, especially in high-risk kinds of application like medical diagnosis or treatment or financial advice and things like that. So there's still a lot of work to be done to maintain rails, so to speak, that limit the excursions. The thing which is, I would say, scary is the introduction of AI-based agents that can take actions that have real-world consequences, whether it's spending money or making purchases or making other decisions and then taking actions to implement them. We don't quite know, I think, how a world full of AI agents is going to impact our social and economic environment. So I'm very, I would say, concerned about their introduction without adequate attention being paid to the potential downsides of mistakes that are made. That leads me to conclude that the AI systems of that type need to have strong audit trail mechanisms. We need to know who did what to whom and when, so that if something does go wrong, we can go back to figure out where it went wrong and then hold parties accountable who should have responsibility. I'm sure that there will be liability questions, insurance questions, and legal questions that will come up. A self-driving car hits someone, who's at fault, and how do we adjudicate that is still to come. Jan LeCun is concerned. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he is very concerned about the rapid use of LLM agents without thinking through more fundamental understanding of how to build artificial intelligences. He and I would share a common interest in world modeling, where the AI system builds a useful and constructive model of how the world works, not just physically, but what its conventions are, and then can use that model to reason in order to solve problems or make plans. I think that Jan is pushing in that direction, which was part of what the MIT research was trying to do back in the 80s and 90s or so. So I think there's real work to be done. We may adopt and apply today's technology only to find that it's not as reliable as it needs to be, which is why accountability is going to be a really important component in the way this all evolves.
That's fascinating. And do you have any knickknacks that you want to share from your 50-year odyssey?
Yeah, let me bring up one in particular.
Okay.
Here we go.
Oh, that's not what I was expecting.
That is an alligator. Now, you might say, what's going on here? I started collecting alligators some time ago. And you might say, well, why would I do that? There's a story about a guy who is asked to go out and drain a swamp. They call him up 6 months later and say, how you doing draining the swamp? And he says, listen, when you're up to your ass in alligators, sometimes you forget your job is to drain the swamp. And I've been up to my ass in internet alligators for 50 years now. And so I started collecting alligators so I could get to know them. And so I have about 150 alligators scattered around the house. Not all as big as the one that I just showed you, which is a real alligator head. The rest are, small size things, wood,
Okay. Yeah.
gold, sometimes glass. My wife is an interior designer, and bless her heart, she has allowed me to have alligators scattered around the house, even though it's probably not her first choice of decor. So that's one thing to share with you. I do have one other thing, if I can get it down off the wall, that that you might find interesting. So see if I can do that.
Okay, I don't want you to injure yourself.
I hope I can do it without breaking anything.
Yeah. If you're gonna break it, it's okay.
So this was a gift. This is a gift that I was given by USC Information Sciences Institute. It says interface message processor on it. It's a card from a Honeywell DDP 516, which was part of the original interface message processors, or IMPs, of the ARPANET. And so this is an artifact which I have proudly displayed in my office.
Tell me the significance of it again, Vint.
Okay, the first interface message processors of the ARPANET were based on Honeywell's DDP 516 and 316 machines. When I left ARPA in 1982, the guys at USC Information Sciences Institute put this plaque together, including a piece of a Honeywell machine, just as a reminder that I had been involved in the ARPANET project.
Oh, that's neat. It's a good
So
memento of the ARPANET project that launched all of this.
It launched everything. If it had not been successful, then we never would have done the internet.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, Vint Cerf, who is one of the founders of the internet. He's the reason why we're able to communicate with FaceTime, have telehealth, have remote work options, remote education, all of that stemmed from his thinking about TCP and IP, and that's truly incredible. Thank you so much, Vint. This has been fantastic to spend some time with you. Really appreciate it.
That was a fun chat. Thanks so much. Look forward to seeing you on the net. Cheers.